Why do people actually mist their orchids in the first place? And the answer is to increase the humidity levels. Orchids like high humidity levels of between 40 to 70%. And this isn't something that we can often provide naturally in our homes. Our homes quite often would have humidity levels of less than 40%, particularly in the winter when all our doors and windows are shut and the central heating is on and drying out the air. So misting your orchids or increasing the humidity level can actually be really beneficial. And low humidity levels, when they become very low, can damage the plant. It can affect the growth rate of the plant, it can cause wrinkling of the leaves, and it can even damage the developing buds, which are very sensitive, and sometimes they can become stunted and even drop from the plant in very low humidity levels. But of course we have to be careful because high humidity levels can cause problems too. If the humidity level is very high, it can really predispose the plants to developing diseases. Fungal and bacterial diseases love humid conditions, particularly when airflow isn't good. So I'm now going to discuss 3 reasons why people do mist their orchids and why it's a common practice. So first reason we've covered already, and that is to increase the humidity level. The second reason is that you can actually water orchids by misting them. Orchids typically don't grow in soil in their natural environment. They grow attached to tree branches and trunks, and they get their water sometimes from the air, sometimes in high humidity conditions. They absorb water through their leaves and through their air roots directly from the air, and also from water that runs off the branches and trunk after it rains and the roots absorb it at the time. So misting sort of is an attempt to recreate this natural process, but the problem is we're growing orchids in a very unnatural way, so this can sometimes cause some problems. The third reason is foliar feeding. So you can actually add a very dilute amount of fertilizer to water when you're misting your orchids, and the orchid will absorb these nutrients along with the water through their leaves and through the roots, and you can actually feed the plant at the same time as you're misting it, which is great. But there are a few problems, and I wouldn't recommend it. So we'll go on to discuss 6 reasons why you shouldn't mist your orchids. So the first one, and I think, to be honest, it's almost the most important one for a lot of people, because and that is you can actually end up with fungal spots on the petals of the flowers. And of course most people buy orchids in the first place for their beautiful flowers, and if we're spraying water on our orchids, the water droplets can sometimes sit on the petals for a long time, and you can end up with a little black spot of fungus developing on that petal, and this will stay for the life of the flower. There's no getting rid of it, and it really can disfigure the flower. So that's a real downside of misting orchids. Second reason is crown rot. If you mist your orchids, if you take your spray bottle, mist your orchid leaves, mist your flowers, a lot of the water will gather on the leaves and droplets, and it'll run down, particularly with Phalaenopsis orchids, it'll run down into the crown where the leaves emerge from the stem, and it forms a little pool of water here. And that pool of water, because airflow isn't very good in indoor spaces, water will sit for a long time, and again it really predisposes the plant to fungal and bacterial diseases, which can kill the plant very, very quickly. It's also worth saying that in nature, orchids don't grow upright like this, and they attach on to the branches or trunks of trees with their roots, and the leaves actually then hang down. The leaves will actually be at an angle, and they will hang down from the branch, so any water typically will hit the leaf and it'll run down and away from the crown. But of course, the way we grow them indoors, all the water goes towards the crown, so getting water in your leaves is a big problem. Third reason is, quite simply, there are better ways to increase the humidity for your orchids, and I'll cover those very, very shortly if you stay tuned. The fourth way is it can actually dehydrate your orchids if you mist them. If you mist your orchids, there are little pores in the underside of the leaves called stomata. The plant thinks that the humidity level has gone up dramatically. All these pores open and the plant starts to absorb the water directly from the air. But of course, that humidity is very short-lived. A lot of it will end up in droplet form on the leaves. Humidity levels in the air drop suddenly, leaving the stomata on the underside of the leaves open. And then, of course, water starts escaping out the stomata instead of going in, and this can dehydrate the plants in the worst circumstances. Fifth reason is that root watering of your plants is more effective. So if you just water your plant from the top into the growth medium, the roots will absorb all the water that the plant needs. And in fact, I would always recommend do not get your orchid leaves wet. It just avoids so many problems. Sixth reason, and I think I've probably covered it already, is risk of disease. So if you mist your orchids, the water droplets will sit for a long time on the leaves. They don't evaporate very quickly indoors because the airflow is typically very poor, and this really predisposes your orchid to developing diseases. So this brings us back to the question, can you mist your orchids? Short answer is yes, you can mist your orchids, but I would not recommend it. I think for the vast majority of people who keep orchids, in a casual way, who aren't expert or professional growers, don't mist your orchids because it causes more problems than it benefits the plants. Professional growers do mist orchids, but they do it in a very controlled way. If they mist the orchids, they will actually get them to grow healthier, stronger, bigger, and more beautiful. But it's an immensely precise process, and you're very unlikely to be able to replicate that at home. You're much more likely to just introduce a problem. So, if you're not going to mist your orchids, then what would I recommend? Well, if you want to increase the humidity level for your orchids, there's three main options that I think are quite good. Number one, tray, use a humidity plant tray. Get it considerably bigger than the actual pot you're using. Sprinkle a few pebbles over the tray. Fill the drip tray up with maybe half a centimetre to a centimetre of water. Make sure the water level doesn't come up above the level of the pebbles, and then set your plant pot on top of the pebbles. As a result of doing this, the water will evaporate around the plant, but the pot won't be sitting in the water, so the roots won't be in contact with water, and you won't increase the risk of disease. Second thing is to group plants together. So all plants are losing water all the time by transpiration. So that means that the stomata on the underside of the leaves are losing water. This water is going into the air, and it is increasing the humidity levels in the local area. The third way you can increase humidity is just to use a humidifier. So you can either use an electric humidifier or simply a passive humidifier. Passive humidifiers aren't very expensive at all. An electric humidifier, generally they do cost quite a bit, but if you've got a lot of houseplants or you've got general low humidity problems in your house, it's well worth an investment. The other thing that I would definitely recommend doing if you're wanting to really take care of your orchids is to think about getting a humidity meter, and you can actually get these combined with thermometers. This is the one I use. It's really quite compact. It's also very cheap, so it is. So you've got the humidity level with the minimum and maximum humidity level since it was last zeroed, and same with the temperature, current temperature, and the minimum and the maximum temperature that there's been since it was last zeroed. So I think these are really, really handy. As I say, they're dead cheap, and I'll leave a link in the description below where you can get one of these. Thanks very much for watching this video. If you want to learn more about orchid care and houseplants in general, I'd love you to come over to smartgardenguide.com. If you've enjoyed this video, please think about pressing the like button and subscribing. I'm going to be producing a lot more videos about indoor gardening and houseplant care. If you've got any questions, I'd love you to leave a comment below and I'd be delighted to answer them for you. Thanks very much for watching. Bye.